The A755 smartphone is the latest flagship mid-range smartphone from GTeL Zimbabwe.
Look at them. The GTeL on dimensions is shorter and wider, but also about 3mm thicker than the Itel.
I'm going to talk about GTeL. 6 hours ago, I announced that a new era is coming, an X era, knowing which GTeL usually likes to tease a release abo. They really teased us with something good, with something that looks nice.
GTeL is currently the only active local smartphone manufacturer in Zimbabwe. Established in 2011, they have had an interesting but winding journey which somehow positioned them to be resilient even when the economy, competition, and supply chain issues stood at odds against them. We've had all but 3 companies try to crack the smartphone manufacturing game in Zimbabwe, or at the very least, materialize a local smartphone brand. Astro Mobile, another such company, also took on the task of being a Zimbabwean smartphone producer. Founded in 2013, they released several devices, including what they claimed at the time was the world's thinnest phone, the Virtual 2, launched in 2014. They went on to release several other devices, including the Genesis Fab in 2017 and the Genesis S8 in 2019. Astro is quoted as claiming that it generated $5 million in revenue in its first year of operation in 2013 and planned to grow that revenue to $50 million within the following year. They were also exploring an ambitious project to set up a local manufacturing plant in Harare's industrial region of Masasa, where they would assemble televisions and decoders initially and then move on to mobile devices like smartphones and tablets later down the line. This ambition, unfortunately, was not realized in Zimbabwe. Astro faced too many delays in getting approvals, compounded by a myriad of regulatory hurdles, and ultimately moved their manufacturing operations to neighboring Zambia.
Hello Zimbabwe, you spoke, we listened. I bring to you great, exciting and sizzling news of the year.
Most Zimbabweans may not remember this brand, but in 2019, Avion Mobile also tried its hand as a local smartphone manufacturer. They were a bit under the radar, but arguably offered the most comprehensive range of electronic products, more comprehensive than what GTeL and Astro had. They had smartphones, smartwatches, Bluetooth speakers, laptops and tablets, and other accessories to support all these devices. Avion seemed to have also managed to figure out pricing with their products, undercutting those of GTeL and Astro. That said, they were a bit of a black box. Avion is the only manufacturer that was not willing to provide review units for me to make content for. They also limited media access to the extent that outside of their promotion efforts and one article from TechZim, no other mainstream publication outside of TechZim ever talked about them. From 2019 to 2021, when they last posted on their Facebook page, Avion only ever had the same line of smartphones that they launched with and no successors to those models. It's a mystery as to how their business model worked, but Avion ended up fading off the face of Zimbabwe's market as quietly as they had entered.
GTeL, a self-made man, the founder and firmly at the helm of Astro Mobile, a leading Zimbabwean cellular phone manufacturer, can afford to go down memory lane.
Around 2014, GTeL was getting its footing in the Zimbabwean market, but it wasn't alone. Astro was also gunning for the market and implementing a similar strategy to that of GTeL. Moreover, Transsion, a player whose resources far outranked GTeL and Astro combined, entered the same market with 3 different smartphone brands, Itel, Tecno, and Infinix, and the whole product range for all 3 brands was placed in the same price segment that the local players were in. Nonetheless, GTeL claimed to be pushing 18,000 units a month in 2013, roughly bringing its sales for that year to 250,000 units, and by 2015, the company had sold around 900,000 units. Fast forward to 2025, and GTeL is pushing its Delta 16 smartphone, an in-house design, going for $170, a pricing strategy that GTeL settled on since the release of their Infinity lineup of devices, of keeping their smartphones priced just under $200. Currently, their toughest challenge is a joint strike force of aggressive foreign players, especially Itel, which is following a similar recipe of offering competitive smartphones at under $200, and a thriving pre-owned market. As for the local competition, it's been tough for Astro to crack the formula, resorting to several unsuccessful attempts, including selling some obscure brands like Logic from South America, and more recently Hotwave smartphones and tablets from China. They seem to have found some semblance of fortune in Zambia, whilst significantly scaling down their operations in Zimbabwe. As for Avion, the Nash Paints division just went quiet, without any new models in their lineup to rekindle some embers of interest, and a failure to claim a sustainable slice of the market. They simply disappeared, with their Facebook page last posting 4 years ago in 2021. GTeL is the last man standing. How are they pulling it off? GTeL holds a prominent memory in my mind and the minds of everyone my age when it comes to smartphone brands in Zimbabwe. In 2009, these brands of smartphones flooded the market as an affordable option to own a mobile device, primarily among the youth. They did, however, exhibit a very strong reputation for their poor quality, further amplified by poor local backup, warranty, and support. This reputation at its peak resulted in a Facebook page being opened up with the sole intent to call GTeL out on its shortcomings in quality and backup support. GTeL rebranded to GTeL and brought in products branded with the GTeL logo, complete with a Made in Zimbabwe plaque. These products were a step up in both quality and price from the GTeL products before them, and they came with the promise of improved backup and support. Regardless of these smartphones labeled as Made in Zimbabwe, they were rebranded models of existing smartphones from lesser known but competent brands. For example, first, they got their hardware tried and tested from existing competent device manufacturers. This meant that their devices benefited from an industry standard in build quality, as well as more premium components such as cameras and displays. Both of the GTeL devices mentioned were just more premium and better performing products than those coming out of its local competitors. In fact, these GTeL devices were much closer to established brands like Samsung, Nokia, and Apple at the time than they were to Astro and later on Avion. They chose their manufacturing partners very well, resulting in competitive products that had solid hardware. Secondly, They fundamentally developed the software running on their smartphones in-house, allowing them flexibility on what features they add to their devices, including their smartphone tracking software, which for quite some time was one of the key selling points for GTeL smartphones.
Xiaomi files for bankruptcy. According to reports, the Chinese smartphone maker fails to pay debts of 648 creditors.
Xiaomi stopped operations in 2018 and declared bankruptcy, whilst Liego's latest product, the Z20, was released 5 years ago in 2020. GTeL ended up pivoting. The pivot involved moving to another hardware manufacturer, but this time around, one who allowed for more flexibility with the physical design of their smartphones and the choice of material, colors, and specifications. GTeL already had an internal software division responsible for developing and customizing the software that they run on their products. Added to that, they opened up a design studio at their office in Harare, where they make prototype designs of these smartphones. Over time, GTeL went from being a distributor to white labeling Xiaomi and Liego devices and ultimately designing their smartphones in-house and outsourcing the manufacturing to China. It's a similar process to how iPhones are designed in California, USA, but made in China, with the key differences being the extent of the in-house development. GTeL's strategy of outsourcing the development and hardware manufacturing, taking advantage of economies of scale from placing large orders and carefully selecting partners, ultimately enabled them to produce a quality product at competitive rates. That said, they still had to contend with Transsion's Itel, Tecno, and Infinix, who also could pull off top-notch products at a competitive price. GTeL needed something more. Zimbabwe is predominantly a cash-based economy. Because of the volatility of the economy, the frequent currency pivots, and inflation, banks and businesses are either no longer offering loans at all or will only offer loans to employees of specific companies, which is quite a short list. However, early on, local companies discovered a large market in a group of people usually overlooked when it comes to products like smartphones. This group of people is civil servants. Their salaries are processed through the Salary Service Bureau, or SSB, a government entity that manages salaries and deductions for civil servants. That last part is where GTeL and Astro capitalized on as a vehicle to offer their products on credit. A bulk of their customers are civil servants, and they offer them zero deposit credit on any of their products. Since they just deduct the monthly payments directly from the SSB, it's a frictionless process for the client and for the business. It reduces the rate of defaulters whilst expanding its total addressable market. Supporting this point quantitatively has proven a challenge, as GTeL is a private company and does not share its financial data. But even then, I'll be willing to argue that GTeL's significant customer base and business is coming from civil servants taking advantage of their flexible credit facilities. Arguably, credit facilities running on the SSB are the one trump card GTeL has used to stay relevant in the Zimbabwean market, even with the aggressive competition they have to contend with. Pan-African juggernauts in the form of Itel, Tecno, and Infinix, a thriving market of imported refurbs from China, Dubai, and South Africa, and the local pre-owned smartphone market, GTeL understood that credit is king. At this point, GTeL has seen a decent run of success in Zimbabwe. 18,000 monthly sales and an estimated 216,000 units sold in 2013, and close to 900,000 total units sold between 2009 and 2015. The next move was expanding outside of Zimbabwe, with their biggest launch being in Kenya in May of 2015. Entry into this market was supposed to be in partnership with Kenya's largest mobile operator, Safaricom. In this deal, GTeL announced it would be working with Safaricom as a distribution partner, utilizing Safaricom's network of physical stores until they set up their own sales network. This deal ended up facing challenges, with Safaricom claiming that GTeL has made contact with Safaricom. However, formal contract negotiations on its proposal are yet to start. GTeL then pivoted to Airtel Kenya, another mobile operator in the country. The deal this time around stuck, and GTeL sold their devices under contract and bundled with an Airtel SIM and a monthly allocation of airtime, data, and SMSs. And whenever a new model is released, customers on this contract will get an upgrade while retaining their old devices. Taking a page from their SSB strategy in Zimbabwe, GTeL approached savings and credit cooperative organizations, or SACCOs, in Kenya in a bid to offer credit schemes for their smartphones. Where the SSB in Zimbabwe is a formal system run by the government to facilitate salary disbursements for civil servants and direct credit deductions, SACCO is a bit less formal. SACCOs are member-based financial institutions that pool savings and provide credit to their members, often with lower interest rates than banks. They are widespread in Kenya, especially amongst salaried workers, farmers, and small business owners. SACCOs play a critical role in financial inclusion, allowing members to access loans based on their savings and repayment history. In the Zimbabwean context, SACCOs operate in a very similar way to rounds, where a group of individuals in a community contribute towards a pool of funds that are either dispersed to individuals when their turn comes or used as a pool of funds that contributors can take loans from. While it's informal in comparison to the SSB in Zimbabwe, SACCOs are more structured than rounds in Zimbabwe, with some of them having a range of financial products that include savings accounts, loans, insurance, and investment opportunities, as well as offering lower interest rates on loans compared to banks. GTeL's strategy with SACCOs was to supply devices to SACCO members with flexible payment terms, utilizing existing SACCO loan schemes, and to quickly penetrate community-based markets without heavy advertising. Whilst there is no firm documentation as to the cause of their lack of success in the Kenyan market, any of the following, or a combination of all of them, could have contributed as factors that led to GTeL's demise. The budget smartphone market in Kenya thrives, with Tecno, Oppo, and Infinix, just to name a few. GTeL struggled for visibility. Safaricom's denial hurt credibility. Airtel's partnership lacked Safaricom's reach and weak visibility against dominant rivals. Contract plus device plus data model demands heavy investment and sustained uptake. Competitive pricing and logistical overhead likely squeezed margins. GTeL's Kenyan gambit might not have panned out in a way they had hoped for, but it was most certainly a point of education for the manufacturer that led them to keep experimenting with their business model. GTeL has had its fair share of missteps, with less than ideal backup and support for their device repairs, they faced criticism around quality back in the GTeL days, and even had a messy entry into Kenya, a market that they have since pulled out of. They are also a private company who aren't obliged to publish their financial figures, something that has made understanding the level of success their business model has brought them. But in a market as volatile and competitive as Zimbabwe, they have weathered the economic winds, including the relaunch of the Zimbabwean local currency twice. They protected their slice of the Zimbabwean market despite the entry of budget smartphone giants in Itel and Tecno and the booming second-hand market. Whilst other local smartphone makers like Astro went from selling Astro branded devices to reselling obscure South American brands and ultimately reselling obscure Chinese brands, and Avion coming in late to the party and lasting all but 3 years before closing shop, GTeL has been incrementally growing in its business model and in the sophistication of its production process. They went from slapping their logo and custom theme on Gioni and Liego devices, then calling it a day, to developing an in-house design studio, designing their own prototypes and contracting electronics manufacturers to build their phones using the specs and designs supplied to them by GTeL. GTeL's smartphone project was also successful enough to fund a diversification project into high-end property development. Under the brand of Grand Home Designs, GTeL has an impressive and expanding property portfolio that, if I am judging by the rate of growth in new developments, seems to be getting its fair share of success. This is an exciting part of their story and I feel also deserves its own dedicated video. GTeL's story isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. And in a world obsessed with disruption, sometimes survival is the greatest innovation. As I was researching for this GTeL story, I bumped into a short clip by ZW Creatives. I love what they're doing and they're a new Zimbabwean tech channel on YouTube. They brought back a very fond memory of mine from a review of the GTeL A7150X4 that I published in 2016. The focus from ZW Creatives was on me calling it the iPhone of Zimbabwe. It's interesting how in some way this has turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Apple designs its products in California and outsources the manufacturing to companies like Foxconn in China. GTeL is also following the same process. When I was collecting the review units for the GTeL Infinity 13, I was privileged enough to be handed a silver briefcase at GTeL's Harare offices with material samples, color samples, and prototype dummies that GTeL produced as they worked on finalizing the design for the Infinity 13. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to take any photos or videos of these engineering and design samples, but I got an extremely rare insight into what goes into producing a GTeL smartphone, and I honestly gained more respect for the work that they do. 9 years after releasing that article, I will still maintain my stance on GTeL being the iPhone of Zimbabwe. Oh, and shout out to GTeL for turning 15 years old this year. It's been a great job and all the very best.